My name is Scott Speegle. I work with the Illinois Department of Transportation. I'm the Passenger Rail and Transit Communications Manager. So I work very closely while I'm part of the communications team at IDOT. I work very closely with the rail division, and part of my job is to do public involvement activities for our various rail projects that we've got going around the state. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Chicago-Rockford project that we've undertaken, but we also have we're continuing to work on the Chicago to St. Louis high-speed rail to get the speed up to 110 miles per hour. That's still something that we're working on. We're also working on an extension of our train service out to the Quad Cities, as well as included in the Rebuild Illinois capital project improvements. There were money set aside for improvements to the Chicago to Carbondale corridor for the Illini and Saluki trains that we run. We've got a lot going on rail-wise across the state. Rockford, the Chicago to Rockford project is one of our top priorities. I would say that, and well, they're all top priorities. So, so I'd like to share my screen here, and let me just make sure it's gonna work.
Share screen.
Yeah. Slideshow. Can everyone see the slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Oh, thank you. Actually, let me start by thanking you for the invite to speak to your group. Like I said, I'm involved with public involvement, so part of my job is to come and speak to different groups around the state about our rail projects. So I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully I can give you some information, and we can take some questions later on.
Oh, also, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we can answer them later. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. I'm going to go through the project presentation, and then we can do Q&A at the end, if that's okay.
That sounds good.
So just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be talking about tonight, a little bit about the history of this project, as well as the service that was previously out to Rockford, what the anticipated service looks like, some improvements, what's proposed. There's two segments of the corridor from Chicago to Rockford. One is controlled by Metra, and the other is controlled by the Union Pacific. We'll talk about what some of the improvements are going to be proposed for each of those segments. Talk about the different stakeholders. There's a lot of stakeholders that are part of the project and involved in different aspects of the project. The program timeline, what we're looking at and what we're thinking about, and then some time for Q&A, as I said. Just a quick history of the service between Chicago and Rockford. 74 to 81, Amtrak operated train service under the Black Hawk label. It was ended in 1981 due to decrease in funding and really cars overtaking train as a primary mode of transportation. We've been looking at we and Amtrak together have been kind of looking at restoring the service out to Rockford 2007 when Amtrak conducted a feasibility study looking at reinstating service. From 2010 to 2014, we continued to study options and routes for adding service. I believe in 2013, the decision was made to use the UP route from Elgin out to Rockford rather than the EN route. And then in 2015, the program was put on hold by the previous administration when they came into office. In 2019, the Governor Pritzker announced the Rebuild Illinois Capital program, which included $275 million for this service, to resume this service. Oops, excuse me, sorry, let me go back. And then in 2020, 2019 and 2020, we reinstated the program and began working towards restoration of service. What the anticipated service is going to look like, it will be considered intercity passenger rail service. We're looking at having maximum speeds of 79 miles per hour, which will, excuse me, which will make the trip car competitive. There'll be 2 round trips a day. One in the morning going each way from Rockford into Chicago and Chicago out to Rockford, and then an afternoon or evening route the same, going the reverse. We are still working to determine the operator of the service. It will either be Amtrak or Metra. That decision is being looked at, and the ramifications of the different which operator would be chosen are being looked at by our high level administration, executive level administration, as well as the governor's office. And we hope to have that decision, which will set the direction of the project. We hope to have that decision certainly this year, but hopefully this summer or early fall. This is the proposed map and the project map from Chicago Union Station out to Elgin. That's the Metra controlled line. At Elgin, we would switch over to Union Pacific tracks with intermediate stops right now planned for Huntley, Belvedere, and then obviously into Rockford. Marengo is also a possible station. We're looking at that as a possibility. That decision has not been made yet. One of the big parts of the project, and you'll hear about that in a moment, is the connection between the Metra and UP tracks near Elgin at Big Timber. That'll be a big part of that, and that work on that project is we're trying to accelerate that, since that's a connection that needs to be made regardless of who the operator is. We're hoping to get that part of the project started a little sooner than some of the other parts. So here are the proposed improvements for the Metra segment from Chicago out to Elgin, or between Chicago and Elgin, I should say. The big part of that is the construction of the connection between the Metra and Union Pacific at Big Timber. We look to make some station improvements at Elgin Station. I believe the current plan is to have that station be the same as the Metra station, but with improvements that would be needed to be made, as well as some crossover track, including some signal improvements that need to be made in order to make that a safe connection between the two controlled lines. Metra operates that service between on the Milwaukee District West line. Their commuter operations, it's a busy Metra segment. It is dispatched by Canadian Pacific, however, and Canadian Pacific Freight also operates over the segment. There is some challenges, as always, when we share corridors with freight railroad. There are some challenges that need to be met, as well as different considerations that need to be made in terms of scheduling and when is the best time for the trains to be running, that would have the least amount of potential interference with freight. The proposed improvements in the Union Pacific segment, it's a little more extensive. We've been and will continue to evaluate the track conditions in order to support increasing the speeds from the existing freight operations, which is 40 miles per hour max or slower, to passenger rail operations, which is up to 79 miles per hour. Obviously, speed is a factor. We want the service to be car competitive so that ridership that'll give us the best chance at good ridership. We obviously also want safe operations, as well as smooth ride for the passengers and the people on the train. As I mentioned before, part of the improvements that need to be made is the construction of the connection between Metra and the Union Pacific at Big Timber. We also are looking at and will enhance grade crossing surfaces, approaches, and warning devices along that stretch of the corridor. Obviously, like I said, safety is a big concern, and those are important safety improvements that need to be made to make sure that we're not, not to make sure, to minimize the chances of any accidents. This picture actually is of the Rock River Bridge from track level, but we're looking at that, and if there are any improvements that need to be made to the bridge structure, as well as any other bridge structures along the route, to make sure that, again, safe and we can get the speeds that we need. And then we're looking at if the potential for second siding and second main track locations with a possible potential siding in Marengo, a potential second main track past the Belvedere Yard. That you all know, but sidings and second mains are very important for sharing the corridor with freight trains and the ability to pass or move while a freight is on the corridor as well as possible meets for the passenger trains going back, in opposite directions. We'll look at where those meets might happen and what the need is for sidings and possible second mains, so that we can keep the fluidity of the corridor as good as possible. Just again, the segment between Elgin and Rockford is owned by the Union Pacific Railroad. They currently operate one daily round-trip train between West Chicago and Belvedere through Big Timber. And there's also a local round-trip freight train that operates from Belvedere to Huntley, depending on the need, several days a week. So it's not a segment that is extensively used or heavily trafficked by freight trains, but it is obviously a consideration that needs to be taken into account in order to make this service as active as possible. Stakeholder coordination. These are the representations of the many stakeholders that are involved in the process. Obviously, IDOT, we are working with all of these different partners and stakeholders to get this service going. We also are administering the funds and overseeing the project, the engineering and so on, we've hired an outside consulting firm to work on the engineering. But we're coordinating obviously with Metra and Union Pacific as the owners of the different segments of the track. Federal Railroad Administration is involved, safety and coordination with them. Metra is also a possible operator, as is Amtrak, so we're working with both of those entities. Canadian Pacific Railway, as I mentioned earlier, dispatches the Metra segment between Elgin and Chicago, and is involved in that way. The Illinois Commerce Commission regulates railroad crossing safety. So we will be working with them closely on all the plans for the crossings, the improvements that need to be made. And we have quite a bit of experience working with them on other projects. So while it can be challenging sometimes to make sure, safety obviously is a hugely important aspect of any project, and we work closely with them. We're working closely, obviously, with the station communities, Huntley, Elgin, Belvedere, Rockford, Chicago, and as I mentioned, the possibility of a stop in Marengo. We also, there are communities where the train will go through but not stop. We're working with those communities, and as well as jurisdictions with grade crossings. IDOT Region District 1 and 2 will be coordinating with them. They're the highway folks. Towns and cities might have jurisdiction of roads that have crossings. We work closely with all those jurisdictions to make sure, again, that we've safe and good operations. In terms of public involvement, we've only really starting, and this presentation and this small group meeting is really one of the first that we've done. We do plan, once some of the decisions have been made and we're a little bit further along in the project, we'll be launching a website, social media channels to keep the public informed of what's going on, sources of information. We'll be holding public meetings to explain the project and what construction will be going on, what impacts there might be to communities while work is happening. We will be talking with and working with the different communities that have stations, the station cities, in terms of location of the station, some design input from the communities, and then and making sure that the stations meet the requirements. There's also coordination with Amtrak to make sure that the stations are meeting the minimum requirements for platform length and so on that Amtrak has. We will be putting out newsletters and then other small group meetings similar to this, but also perhaps down the road in person. We're looking forward to getting out into the public and talking more and giving more detailed information about the project. This is the timeline that we've got that we're working on. As I mentioned, 2020, the program set up and planning started with the Rebuild Illinois Capital Project program, being put into effect. As I mentioned, we did hire, we had to go through the process of hiring an outside consulting firm for engineering and project management. The rail division, for those of you who don't know, really is about six or seven full-time people, a couple engineers and other folks that are involved in different aspects of rail. While we oversee the projects, we don't have the staff or the bandwidth to be able to do all the engineering and all the different aspects that are required. So we hired an outside consulting firm. Last year we began and we continue into this year with reaching agreements with the stakeholders. Primary discussions have been with UP and Metra so far, but we'll be working with all the different communities and the station agreements as we get into this year and continue in this year. We're also working on preliminary engineering, field review, getting any environmental clearances that are necessary, and coordinating with municipalities. Let me just say something about preliminary engineering and the environmental clearances. One of the advantages, I guess, maybe, is of doing this project with completely state funding is that we're not required to meet all of the federal requirements if we had any federal money in for environmental clearances. But that being said, we still want to make sure that we're in that, we've done the work necessary so that if, and everyone's aware that there's a fair amount of money, capital money that's coming out of the federal government over the next several years through the various capital programs at the federal level. And it is possible that at some point we would apply for federal funding. And so that if we've done the environmental work that meets the requirements for federal level funding, then that's one hurdle that we've overcome, and it puts us in a better line for receiving federal funding at some point in the future if necessary. Right now, we don't have any applications pending for this project. We do feel that the capital money that was designated through Rebuild Illinois, the state capital money, will be sufficient. But as I'm sure everyone's heard, costs and inflation and supply chain problems and all sorts of issues that have arisen are impacting the cost of projects, all different types of capital projects. And so while it's not something that we're anticipating needing at this moment, it is possible that in the future, in order to get this completed, we may need to apply for federal money in the future. In 2023, we'll be finishing up the design work, getting that up all finalized, and then we hope to begin construction of some portions. I mentioned that Big Timber is a priority, the connection at Big Timber, so that we can connect the Metro segment and the UP segment. That's one of the first priority items in terms of any construction. And that's most likely where we'll see the first actual shovels in the ground, so to speak, for the project. We anticipate construction taking, I guess, 3 construction seasons, 23, 24, and 25, that we tentatively in our target for starting service out to Rockford is 2025. I mentioned, these schedules we put together, and we do our best to stick to them, and we do our best to hit them. But there are issues that come up, and can't always hit everything. So while we hope and we're shooting for 2025, it is possible that could slide a little bit. Right now, we're optimistic that we'll be able to get the service out to Rockford in 2025, starting in 25. it for my presentation right now.